Great pleasure to be here with you in Ferns today. The close relationship between Ferns and Wales is testified in the saints' lives of both St David and St Madoc. More parochially, the bishopric of Ferns also shares a distinction with my hometown, Bangor in northwest Wales. The bishoprics of Bangor and Ferns were both turned down, so we're told, by one Gerald de Barry, or Gerald of Wales, as he's more commonly known, partly because they were, in his words, both poor and barbarous. For a zealous church reformer like Gerald, both were ecclesiastical backwaters. Now, the relationship between Wales and Ireland, and Ferns and Wales in particular, do not, thankfully, begin and end with Gerald, nor are they confined to the ecclesiastical sphere. In the next 15 minutes or so, what I hope to do is provide you with a general overview of the various interactions between the Welsh and the Irish in the years surrounding 1169, the conventional date for the Anglo-Norman invasion of Ireland. From the comparatively tranquil vantage point of modern Welsh history, it could be forgiven for seeing Ireland as a land of political ruptures. The significance of single dates such as 1798, 1916 and 1922 as important markers in the making of modern Ireland are a given. In contrast, Welsh historians have fewer dates to lash onto than their Irish colleagues. If anything, the Welsh historian might ask whether Ireland, like the Balkans in Winston Churchill's estimation, has more political history than it can consume. Welsh history, on the contrary, mirroring perhaps the devolution of political power from Westminster to Cardiff, is rather seen as one that is shaped by processes largely social rather than great political upheavals. The one defining point in the political history of medieval Wales is the conquest of the native Principality of Wales, centred on the rugged north and west of the country by Edward I in 1282. The arrival of the Normans in Wales during the 1170s set in train a long process of conquest and resistance, which culminated in what one historian has chillingly termed the English crown's final solution to its Welsh problem. As with 1282, so with 1169 or 1066, there is a tendency to see such markers as waypoints only in the internal history of nations and states. But as the recent centenary commemorations and reflections on the Easter Rising have reminded us, the event in Dublin in 1916 cannot be understood without a consideration of the wider British imperial, European and world context in which they took place. Though the cause and effect of the Easter Rising leads to our own time with the current constitutional position of the north of Ireland and the present, dare I say, Brexit impasse, historians have a duty to strike a balance between celebration or commemoration and then the multi-dimensional historic context. And the same can be said of 1169. Whether we call these conquistadors Normans or Anglo-French, the overwhelming sense that we get from contemporaries is that the late 1160s inaugurated the Adventus Anglorum, the arrival of the English in Ireland. What perhaps remains less well known outside academic circles in Wales, more so than in Ireland, I think, is that 1169 was not solely an Anglo-Irish affair. It also entwined the history of Wales with that of Ireland, marking both a break in older connections and the creation of new networks coloured and shaped by a shared history of conquest and colonisation. Though necessarily selective and cursory, what I want to do now is talk about three broad themes that connected both Ireland and Wales in the decades leading up to 1169, and then consider briefly how these were transformed as the result of the Anglo-Norman invasion and settlement of this island. As the events leading up to 1169 were precipitated by Dermot MacMurrough's departure from Ireland in 1166, My first connecting thread is how Wales and Ireland were linked in the period by a long history of providing succour and shelter for exiles and adventurers, something our first speaker's already touched upon. My second concern will be with the commercial traffic along the liquid highway that links both countries. And lastly, I want to trace the links and connections which pertain to the religious sphere. As we'll see, in the case of each of these themes, the traffic was not one way. Tracing these general patterns should give us a clearer sense of why 1169 matters for Hiberno-Welsh affairs. Other connections, such as the now questioned importance of Ireland or the development of the earliest literature of Wales, go beyond the scope of what I have to say today. Now, it might be helpful to add a few caveats before we begin. The idea that the Welsh and Irish are, in some ways, Celtic cousins would have been an alien concept to our 12th century forebears. The Celtic connection is quite a recent one, based on a realisation from the early modern period onwards that the native languages of the Irish and Welsh, and by extension the Gaelic speakers of Scotland, the Manx, the Cornish and the Bretons, share a common linguistic genealogy. To what extent did the geopolitical and cultural similarities between Ireland and Wales in the medieval period owe a debt to this common and ancient linguistic heritage is a moot point. After all, geographic proximity as much as languages that were as mutually incomprehensible in the 12th century as they are today, would have been just as vital. Nevertheless, the Normans encountered in Wales, like Ireland, a land of many kings and many kingships, a factor which largely accounts for why external observers viewed both native societies as chaotic and violent. Both societies shared similar institutional and legal conditions, and their respective identities were largely shaped by extra-political factors based on a sense of ethnic cohesion, cultural, legal, and linguistic unity. In contrast, the identity of the English and the Scots were ultimately regnal. Along with a shared experience of Anglo-Norman conquest and colonisation, it is these factors which set Wales and Ireland apart from Scotland in the medieval period. Of course, there were key differences too. Welsh history, for one, begins before Wales's slow appearance as an identifiable and distinct territorial identity. By the 8th century, the Britons of Wales, or as we can now call them, the Welsh from that point, had been politically and territorially confined. Yet, the consciousness of a far wider Brittonic world, stretching from what is now Scotland's central belt in the north to Brittany in the south, would continue to run like a silver thread through the literary culture of Wales into the modern period. This sense of disinheritance became hardwired into the Welsh sense of nationality in the medieval period. And some historians have gone as far as to argue that its ideological baggage stunted the development of a form of Welsh nationalism discreetly focused on Wales itself. It is little wonder that the Irish name for Wales literally translates as Little Britain. As one Welsh nationalist poet of the 12th century remarked, and I quote, "What Wales needs and has always lacked most of is instead of an eastern boundary, an east coast." This, of course, is what Ireland has, but in Welsh literary circles at least, the unity of Britain, and with it a high kingship centred on London, would continue to focus the minds on the twin themes of the loss of sovereignty and a prophesied return to former glories. Well, the umbilical cord between Little Britain and Great Britain remains, for now at least, intact. Well, geographical proximity, along with a shared history resulting from this act of fate, have placed Wales and Ireland within the same socio-political sphere. As far back as the early years of the Roman occupation of much of the island of Britain, there are references to political actors crossing the sea as exiles and opportunists. Tacitus, the Roman author of Agricola, records the presence of an exiled Irish ruler in Britain. in his attempt at garnering support from the imperial authorities. The 11th and 12th centuries saw a steady stream of emigres in the other direction, both from Anglo-Saxon England and Wales. One, Rhain the Irishman, as he is termed in the Welsh chroniclers, kept in St David's, is recorded as having landed in force in southwest Wales in 1022, purporting to be the son of Meredydd ab Owain, the foremost Welsh king of the late 10th century. Two factors on the Welsh side of the Irish Sea served to multiply this steady stream of political refugees. The first being the Wales-wide rule achieved by Gruffydd ap Llywelyn in the 1050s and early 1060s, and then from the early 1070s onwards, the advent of the Normans in Wales. Gruffydd ap Llywelyn has the distinction of being the only native Welsh ruler to have brought the whole of Wales, as we would now know it, under his control. It is tempting to credit his success to his use of naval power, a technique strangely underutilised by other Welsh rulers down to the conquest of 1282. Gruffydd's violent rise to power, coupled with the repercussions of his fall in 1064 and the arrival of accusative Norman barons, combined to produce the archetypal figure of this complex Hiberno-Welsh and Hiberno-Norse world, another Gruffydd, Gruffydd ap Cynan. Now, this second Gruffydd was the product of a union between a Welsh political exile and a Hiberno-Norse princess. He also has the distinction of being the only Welsh prince for which we have a contemporary biography, the life of Gruffydd ap Cynan. The life of Gruffydd ap Cynan makes for riveting reading. Unlike the often telegraphic entries in the Welsh and Irish annals, it presents us with a tale that rivals the Game of Thrones in its violence and machinations. For 30 years, he ploughed the furrows of the deep seas in his attempts to win the kingdom of Gwynedd in northwest Wales. His Irish and Norse allies are a constant feature in his biography. The force which he brought over from Waterford to St David's in 1081 consisted, we are told, and I quote, Danes armed with two-headed axes and the Irish carrying iron-tipped spears. One of these Irishmen is even credited later in the tale as having preserved the body of one of Gruffydd's Welsh adversaries in salt, like pork being turned into bacon. This debt to Ireland would be remembered many years later by Gruffydd on his deathbed, with each of the cathedral churches of Ireland, along with St David's in Wales, presented with 20 pieces of silver in his will. Now, far from being exceptional, Gruffydd's career is but one, albeit extreme, example of the fortunes of a Welsh or Hiberno-Welsh emigre in the Irish Sea zone. Various members of other Welsh dynasties, and later too, the early Normans of Wales, men such as Arnulf de Montgomery, could look to Ireland as a place for refuge and recruitment. Viewed over a long period then, Dermot MacMurrough's decision to seek in Britain in the 1160s was far aid in the 1160s was far from exceptional. However, under the right circumstances, a relationship of dependence could turn into denomination, which is what resulted from MacMurrough's fateful voyage. Well, long before 1169, Wales and Western Britain more generally also had strong economic links with Ireland. The harbours and sea lanes of Eastern Ireland were well known to merchants from Britain from at least Roman times. The benign and banal interchange of foodstuffs and luxury goods is only scantily referred to in our written records, but what is clear is that these references are just the tip of a much larger commercial iceberg. In Gerald of Wales's charming depiction of his own locale in southern Pembrokeshire, he provides a tantalising glimpse of this largely silent but clearly vibrant economic nexus, and I quote now from Gerald's journey around Wales. And he says, boats on their way to Ireland from almost any part of Britain scud before the east wind. And from this vantage point, you see them brave the ever-changing violence of the winds and the blind fury of the waters. This is a region rich in wheat, with fish from the sea and plenty of wine for sale. What is more important than all the rest is that from its nearness to Ireland, heaven's breath smells so wooingly here. That sort of contrasts very much with the way that he depicts the native Irish, but sense that the island is as close to heaven as Pembrokeshire could be. Well, of course, where commerce and wealth creation exists, so also does piracy and human trafficking. According to Gerald, some even attributed the early successes of the Anglo-Normans in Ireland to divine punishments for the Irish for their purchase of English slaves. Economic links could also, as they threaten to do in our own day, fall foul of the decisions of those in power. When Maurice de Pendergast decided in about 1170 to abscond from Ireland, Dermot MacMurrough prevented his leaving by sending instructions to all the merchants at Wexford, forbidding them from carrying Maurice and his men back to Britain. Finally, the Irish Sea was also a conduit for intellectual commerce between Wales and Ireland. Now, the religious links go back to an early period, at least as early as the time of St. Patrick. These were to continue right through the early medieval period, with Irish scholars on their way to the continent, passing through the courts of Welsh kings, and Welsh prelates moving in the opposite direction. These connections are apparent in the Welsh annals kept at St David's, which seem to incorporate material drawn from the monastery of Clonmacnoise in Ireland. The Latin life of St Madoc of Ferns was probably copied in Monmouth in southeast Wales in about 1200 is also a telling point. With a quickening pace of church reform and the advent of new monastic orders in the 12th century, further opportunities for intellectual and ecclesiastical exchange were fostered. For example, the Cistercian monastery of Tracton in County Cork was established in 1224 by monks from Whitland in southwest Wales. The monks of Tracton's continued use of the Welsh language in defiance of the French-only rule led in 1228 to a prohibition of visitors from Whitland to Tracton. So to conclude then, in Ireland as in Wales, the intervention of Norman barons and with them the ultimate authority of the English crown were to have a transformative effect on native Welsh and Irish society. Older links were reformed and new ties of lordship, commerce and religion were forged. Both countries were drawn more firmly into the ambit of English political and economic power, and by extension to that, of the wider continental world. It's also served to create new identities, the English of Ireland and the Marches of Wales. Of course, as we face a period of political and economic change in our own time, no matter what the final outcome, we can be fairly certain that the ties of history and geography will continue to bind us as societies dwelling on the opposite end of the Irish Sea. Thank you very much.